It began on a quiet night at the Global Space Research Station, far away from the noise of cities and people. The station stood alone in the desert, surrounded by dry winds and endless stars. Inside, the only sound was the steady hum of machines and the soft tapping of keyboards. Among the few people awake that night was Dr. Lena Voren, an astrophysicist who had spent most of her life looking up at the sky, searching for something she couldn't name. For her, space wasn't just science. It was a mystery she could feel in her bones. The clock on the wall showed 2:47 a.m. Most of the world was asleep. Lena's eyes were fixed on the data feed coming from a deep space telescope orbiting near Jupiter. She had been monitoring a strange signal detected weeks ago, just a small flicker of radiation that didn't match any known pattern. At first she thought it was noise, maybe a reflection, a glitch, or even a cosmic ray. But the pattern kept repeating. The lines on the screen pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. She leaned closer. "Run the sequence again," she said softly to the computer. The same pattern appeared, 3 bursts. Pause. 2 bursts. Pause. Then one final, longer pulse. It was deliberate, too precise to be natural. Lena's chest tightened. She had seen thousands of data patterns in her life. But this was different. It was like someone, or something, was trying to speak through light. She called out to her assistant, who was half asleep at the monitoring desk. "Hey, come look at this," she said. The young man rubbed his eyes and shuffled over. "Is that from Jupiter's orbit?" "Yes, same coordinates, same timing." He frowned. "Could be satellite interference." Lena shook her head. "No, I already checked. There's nothing in that orbit right now, nothing human." They both stared at the screen for a long moment. Outside the station, the stars shimmered across the sky. The world felt so still that night, as if even the universe was holding its breath. Lena took a deep breath and began recording the data. She knew what this could mean. If it was real, it would be one of the greatest discoveries in human history, proof that we were not alone. But she also knew what happened to scientists who claimed too much, too soon. Skeptics, governments, and the media could tear apart a career before the truth even had a chance to breathe. Still, she couldn't walk away. For the next several days, Lena and her team focused all their efforts on studying the signal. They checked every possible explanation: cosmic background noise, asteroid reflections, even secret military tests. None of them matched. The signal was steady, intentional, and intelligent. Word of the anomaly began to spread quietly within the scientific community. A few researchers from Europe and Japan reached out, confirming they had picked up the same pulse pattern on their instruments. That was when Lena's quiet discovery began to ripple across the world. News agencies caught wind of it. Possible extraterrestrial signal detected near Jupiter. People reacted with awe, curiosity, and fear. Some called it a hoax. Others called it the cosmic whisper. But while the world speculated, Lena stayed grounded. She wasn't after fame or headlines. She wanted answers. Night after night, she sat alone in the dim glow of her lab, surrounded by screens filled with data. The pattern played again and again, almost like a song she couldn't get out of her head. She wondered what it was saying. Was it a message, a warning, or just a coincidence written in starlight? One night, after weeks of observation, something strange happened. The signal stopped. Completely. Lena froze. She rechecked the system. Everything was normal. Except the pulse had vanished. The screens went flat. For the first time, she felt a quiet sense of loss, as if a voice that had been speaking to her suddenly went silent. She didn't realize how attached she'd become to that sound, that rhythm in the data that had filled her nights. Then, 3 days later, it returned. But this time, it was different. The pattern had changed. More complex now, longer sequences, almost like a coded language evolving. It was as if the source, whatever it was, had noticed something. Lena felt her pulse quicken. She knew this was bigger than she could handle alone. So she prepared a report, detailed, cautious, and full of evidence, and sent it to the International Science Council. A few days later, she was called to present her findings in a private meeting. The room was filled with top scientists, government officials, and military advisors. Their faces were unreadable as Lena explained everything she had discovered. When she finished, there was silence. Finally, one of the older members leaned forward. "Dr. Voren, what exactly are you suggesting?" She hesitated. "I'm saying the signal is not random. It follows an intelligent pattern. Someone, or something, is transmitting it." The room buzzed with murmurs. A man from the Defense Department spoke sharply. "Are you claiming this is alien communication?" Lena chose her words carefully. "I'm saying it's a possibility we can't ignore." The officials exchanged uneasy glances. Some were curious. Others clearly wanted the topic buried. In the end, the council decided to classify the discovery. The public would be told it was a natural phenomenon, a radiation echo from Jupiter's magnetic field. Lena's request to continue direct observation was denied. That night, as she packed up her files, Lena sat quietly at her desk. She should have felt defeated, but instead something stronger grew inside her. Determination. She couldn't let the truth vanish behind locked doors and red stamps. She stayed at the station long after everyone left, watching the stars blink on the horizon. In her heart, she knew the signal was more than just noise. It felt aware. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft beep. The signal had returned again. Stronger this time. Almost urgent. Lena stared at it, and for the first time, she whispered, aloud, "What are you trying to say?" No one answered, of course. The room was still. The machines hummed. But deep in the darkness of space, the pulse continued, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat reaching out across the void. Over the next few weeks, Lena continued her work in secret. She hid her research on offline drives and disconnected equipment, afraid someone might erase it. She stopped reporting updates to the council. Each new signal carried a slightly different pattern, almost like a conversation forming, slow and deliberate. Lena didn't tell anyone, but she began to feel a strange connection to it, as if the signal somehow recognized her attention. She couldn't prove that, of course, but late at night, when everyone else was asleep and the desert winds howled outside, she felt less alone. Months passed. The media lost interest. People moved on. But Lena never did. She started noticing subtle changes in the signal, new tones, faint echoes, energy fluctuations that didn't fit any known model. The more she studied it, the more she realized it wasn't just random data. It was structured, mathematical in nature, but with emotional rhythm, almost like it had meaning behind it. Then, one night, she discovered something that made her hands tremble. Hidden within the pattern was a mirrored sequence, a perfect reflection of the one she had transmitted earlier during calibration tests. The signal wasn't just broadcasting, it was responding. Something out there was listening. Lena sat back in her chair, staring at the endless numbers on the screen. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with silent electricity. She didn't know what she had awakened, but deep down she felt it. Humanity had just crossed a line. The discovery that began with a simple flicker of light near Jupiter was no longer a question of are we alone. It had become something far more unsettling. Someone had heard us and they had replied. The days after the discovery were strange for Lena. She had done something no one else in the world had managed. She had made contact, or at least started something that felt like contact. But no one around her seemed to understand the weight of it. The government had sealed her reports. The media had been silenced. And yet deep in her lab the signal was still coming. Stronger, clearer, and now almost rhythmic. Every night she sat in front of her screen, headphones on, watching the pulse. It came in waves, always the same pattern, but now with subtle shifts, as if something or someone was trying to match her timing. She started to think about the meaning behind it. Could it be a message waiting for an answer? Could it be a question? She tried not to let her imagination take over, but it was hard not to wonder. Humanity had always looked up at the stars, searching for signs of others. And now, after all those centuries of silence, something had finally spoken back. But how could she know what it wanted? That thought kept her awake night after night. And finally, she made a decision that would change everything. Lena decided to send a reply. At first, it sounded ridiculous, even dangerous. The council had already forbidden her from further experiments, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt. She convinced herself it was for science, a simple test, nothing more. But deep down, it was more personal than that. She wanted to know if the universe was really listening. She started working quietly away from the main communication servers. She borrowed a small transmission array used for deep space calibration and rewired it to the observatory's dish. The old machine wasn't built for messaging alien signals, but it could send a frequency burst across space. She spent weeks designing the response. It wasn't a spoken message or a written language. She knew that would mean nothing to something out there. Instead, she created a simple mathematical pattern, the prime number sequence, followed by the hydrogen signature, and finally, an encoded digital pulse representing the symbol for Earth. It was clean, simple, universal. As she prepared the transmission, she paused to record her own note, not an official log, but a personal one. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. If anyone ever finds this, I didn't mean to disobey orders. I just wanted to see if we were truly alone. She pressed a key. The dish began to rotate, slow and deliberate, aligning toward the coordinates near Jupiter. The transmitter lights glowed a dull blue. Then, with one final breath, she hit send. The room filled with a low hum. For a few seconds, she watched the energy graph rise on her screen, showing the signal traveling upward into space. Invisible, silent, and unstoppable. It was done. Lena sat back, her heart racing. She half expected alarms to go off or someone to burst into the lab and stop her, but nothing happened. The room stayed quiet. She stayed there for hours afterward, staring at the sky through the observatory window. The stars looked no different. The world outside continued as it always had. But inside her, something had changed. For the first time, she felt connected, not just to the stars, but to the vast unknown beyond them. The next morning, she woke up to chaos. News reports were everywhere. Unusual solar activity detected. Global satellites experiencing disturbance. Energy surge recorded across space observatories. Lena froze. She turned on her instruments. The monitors lit up with data overload. The radiation around Jupiter had spiked overnight. The same coordinates she'd transmitted to. Her stomach dropped. She ran tests again and again, hoping it was a coincidence. But the readings didn't lie. Something had changed out there. Something big. She stared at the data, trying to convince herself it wasn't connected to her transmission. "It's just solar interference," she whispered. It has to be. But deep down, she wasn't sure. Within hours, the world's scientific community went into overdrive. Conferences were held. Satellites were redirected. Everyone was trying to understand what had caused the sudden surge of energy near Jupiter. No one knew, and Lena couldn't tell anyone what she had done. She felt trapped between pride and guilt. On one hand, she had finally reached across the stars. On the other, she feared she had awakened something she didn't understand. For the next few days, the signal changed again. The calm, steady pulse she'd grown used to became erratic, stronger, louder, and different. It was as if it had noticed her reply, and was now responding faster, with more force. Lena watched the data scroll across the screen. The energy pattern wasn't random anymore. It mirrored her transmission perfectly, then added new layers. It was a reply. Her breath caught. "It's answering," she whispered. The moment should have been joyful, a moment of triumph for humankind. But something about it felt wrong. The energy output was massive, far beyond what any known communication method would require. And it was growing. In the following days, global systems began to behave strangely. Satellites flickered in and out of connection. Long-range communications failed for minutes at a time. Even the weather satellites started reporting unusual readings, spikes in electromagnetic fields across the upper atmosphere. Still, no one could connect it to the Jupiter anomaly. The world assumed it was solar activity, a temporary disturbance. Lena, however, couldn't ignore the timing. Everything had started less than 24 hours after her signal. Her assistant noticed her worry one evening. "You've barely slept," he said gently. "You think it's because of what you sent, don't you?" She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "If I'm wrong, I'll look foolish. But if I'm right..." He frowned. "Then what?" "Then we've just made contact with something that reacts faster than light and stronger than anything we've seen before." There was silence between them. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. She wanted to tell the world the truth. But she knew what would happen: panic, disbelief, and possibly anger from those in power who had silenced her before. So she waited. But the universe didn't. Within a week, another phenomenon appeared, a strange ripple detected in Earth's magnetic field. The data showed a faint echo traveling from Jupiter's direction, moving toward Earth at an unexplainable rate. Lena's hands shook as she read the report. Whatever she had contacted, it wasn't just answering. It was coming closer. Governments began holding emergency meetings. The public still didn't know the full story, but rumors spread. Some thought it was a massive solar storm. Others believed it was a cosmic event that could affect the planet. Meanwhile, Lena kept receiving faint signals through her instruments, smaller fragments of the main pulse, almost like scattered voices. They came at random times, and each one carried a strange, melodic vibration that she couldn't decode. One night, as she watched the data stream across the monitor, she whispered to herself, "Maybe they're not angry. Maybe they're just curious." She wanted to believe that. But as the next transmission arrived, she noticed something chilling. Embedded within the pattern was a mirror of her own reply, but twisted, amplified, and looped endlessly, like an echo shouting her message back at her louder each time. She felt her chest tighten. "That's not how communication works," she muttered. "That's reflection, feedback." It was as though the signal was building on itself, feeding energy into the same frequency she'd used. And then, suddenly it stopped. The instruments went dark. For the first time since the discovery, there was total silence. Lena sat frozen, staring at the dead screens. It felt like the universe itself had gone quiet. She didn't know it yet, but across the world, satellites had begun to fail one by one. Power grids flickered. The sky shimmered faintly in strange colors that night, visible even in cities. Something had changed in the air, something invisible but heavy. Lena stepped outside the observatory. The desert was still, the wind cold. Above her, the stars were shining brighter than ever. But one point near Jupiter glowed faintly, a shimmer that wasn't there before. She stared at it for a long time. Whatever had answered her was now awake, and humanity was about to find out what that meant. Days turned into weeks, but the silence after the last signal felt heavier than ever. Lena kept waiting, staring at her screens late into the night, hoping to see those familiar waves return. She replayed old data again and again, almost like someone replaying a voice message from a lost friend. The world outside had started to move on. The news no longer mentioned the strange solar disturbance. Scientists called it a temporary anomaly, and life went back to normal for most people, but not for Lena. She couldn't shake the feeling that the silence wasn't an ending. It was a pause. Sometimes, while walking through the quiet corridors of the observatory, she could almost feel the hum of something far beyond the walls, a stillness that didn't feel empty but expectant. Then, one evening it returned. The first sign came as a soft crackling in her headset, a faint whisper of static that didn't belong there. At first she thought it was interference, but when she looked at the monitor, her heart skipped a beat. The pulse was back. It wasn't the same pattern as before. This one was faster, stronger, almost desperate. The clean, rhythmic signal that had once sounded like a heartbeat now rushed like a pulse under stress. She sat upright, every muscle tense, eyes fixed on the screen. "You're back," she whispered. The machine continued to hum, the signal growing sharper by the minute. But something about it was different this time. It wasn't just light or radio waves. It carried electromagnetic bursts strong enough to trip the observatory's backup generators. The lights flickered. The air buzzed with static. Lena felt goosebumps rise on her arms. This wasn't just communication anymore. It was energy. She quickly started recording everything. The data streams filled up her drives faster than she'd ever seen. The signal wasn't just transmitting, it was building up. It almost felt alive. Over the next few hours, other observatories around the world began picking it up too. Reports flooded in from Chile, India, Canada. The same pattern, the same intensity, and every hour it was getting stronger. Within a day, the whole planet knew something was happening again. Television networks started showing strange footage, skies flickering in strange colors, aurora-like lights visible even in countries near the equator. Pilots reported compass failures. Some said they saw flashes above the clouds, silent and distant like invisible lightning. People started to panic a little, though no one knew what to panic about. Governments called emergency science meetings, and public statements reassured citizens it was just a magnetic irregularity. But Lena knew better. She had seen this before, the same location, the same pattern. Only this time the energy was magnified 100-fold. She spent hours analyzing the waves. And then deep within the noise, she noticed something chilling. The return signal was carrying fragments of her original message, the one she had sent months ago. But it wasn't an exact replay. It was altered, expanded like someone had taken her words and added their own reply. Her hands trembled as she listened to the playback. The sound wasn't language, not in any human sense, but it carried rhythm, tone, pace, and intention. It almost felt like emotion. "Are you trying to communicate?" she whispered to the screen. "Or are you warning us?" As she spoke, the power flickered again and the hum of the machines deepened. The monitors flashed white for a brief second, and when the image returned, something new had appeared on the screen. It wasn't a wave pattern this time. It was a form, a geometric symbol drawn by the fluctuations of the signal itself. Perfectly symmetrical, glowing faintly in blue. Lena stared at it, frozen. It wasn't random. No natural wave could produce that shape. It was deliberate, designed. The next morning, she sent her findings to a few trusted scientists she'd worked with before. Within hours, one of them called her in panic. "We're seeing the same formation on our equipment," he said breathlessly. "Every telescope tuned near Jupiter's orbit is receiving that same shape. It's not an accident. It's a projection." That was the moment the world realized this was no longer just a scientific curiosity. Something out there was actively sending structured information, something intelligent. By the end of the week, every space agency was focused on it. The mysterious form had now become global news. The media called it the cosmic pattern. People debated its meaning endlessly. Some said it was a mathematical greeting. Others believed it was a sign of danger. But for Lena, none of that mattered. What haunted her was how familiar it all felt. When she looked at the pattern long enough, she realized something horrifying. It was built using the same data signature she had used in her message. The same pulse duration, the same timing. It was like the universe was holding up a mirror. One night, while running a long analysis, Lena dozed off at her desk. She woke up to the sound of alarms blaring. The system had overloaded. The computers were flashing red warnings. Radiation levels in near space were rising. Her assistant burst in, wide-eyed. "It's not just radiation," he said. "All satellites facing Jupiter have gone offline." Lena's heart raced. She turned on the backup link, scanning the signal's energy output. It was no longer steady. It was pulsing erratically, releasing bursts powerful enough to interfere with Earth's magnetic field. Outside, the night sky shimmered in strange colors again. The world's electric grids began to flicker. Communication networks started dropping, but Lena didn't move away from her screen. She couldn't. Amid all that chaos, she saw one more thing hidden inside the signal. A shift in frequency, almost like the signal had locked onto Earth's magnetic pulse. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. She leaned closer, whispering under her breath, "You found us." In the following days, scientists struggled to stabilize communication systems. No one understood what was happening. Planes were grounded, satellites shut down, and parts of the internet failed in entire regions. The world was on edge, waiting for answers that no one could give. When the governments finally addressed the public, they blamed it on a rare space weather event. But behind closed doors, research teams were running nonstop, analyzing every second of data. And somewhere in those endless streams of information, Lena found the final piece. The pattern had stopped transmitting the symbol. Now it was sending a different signal, one that repeated every 6 hours like a countdown. It wasn't in numbers or words. It was pure frequency, rising and falling in a perfect rhythm, but to Lena it felt unmistakable. It was a call, one that seemed to grow closer with each cycle. She barely slept after that. She sat by her window at night, staring at the faint glow near Jupiter. Sometimes it flickered. Sometimes it pulsed faintly, just like her monitor. The feeling in her chest was a strange mix of awe and fear. She had wanted proof that humanity wasn't alone, and now she had it. But instead of comfort, it brought uncertainty, because whoever or whatever was out there clearly knew we existed. As the days passed, the signal's pulses began reaching Earth's upper atmosphere directly. Small satellites started picking up faint traces without pointing toward Jupiter. The signal wasn't just coming from space anymore. It was echoing through Earth's own magnetic field. That was when Lena realized something profound. The message wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an arrival. She stood outside the observatory one night, feeling the dry desert wind against her face. The stars glittered above, silent witnesses to whatever was unfolding. Somewhere far beyond them, something ancient and powerful had heard humanity's whisper, and was now responding in kind. She didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. The next morning, global monitoring stations reported a new anomaly, a massive, slow-moving wave of electromagnetic energy approaching from deep space. No one could explain it. It wasn't light, it wasn't radiation, and it wasn't anything seen before. Lena watched the reports in silence. She didn't say a word. Deep inside, she already knew what it was. It was the reply. The real one. The signal that would show humanity what happens when the universe finally answers back. And this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar across the stars. The world had changed, though most people didn't realize it yet. The strange energy wave moving toward Earth had no sound, no color, and no clear shape. But it was there, invisible, patient, and unstoppable. At first, it only affected machines. Small things. Communications dropped for minutes, then hours. Air traffic systems glitched. Weather satellites froze mid-broadcast. For a while, people thought it was just another technical fault, the kind that happens now and then. But Lena knew it wasn't. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her lab was filled with the constant low hum of equipment, trying to make sense of what was happening. The wave wasn't random. It was organized. Each fluctuation matched a mathematical pattern, the same one from the original signal. That meant something, or someone, had designed it. Every country was now aware of the disturbance, though governments used different words to describe it. Some called it a natural cosmic ripple. Others said it was a magnetic storm. No one wanted to use the word signal anymore. It frightened people. But behind the scenes, panic was spreading. Meetings took place in quiet underground rooms. Scientists tried to decode what was coming, while military officials asked if it was a threat. Nobody had an answer. Meanwhile, the world above went on as usual, at least for a while. People went to work. Children went to school. But things began to feel off. Radios picked up strange whispers between stations. Compasses spun slightly off north. Birds changed their migration paths. Then one morning, people in several countries reported seeing flashes in the sky, brief, silent arcs of light that faded in seconds. Social media flooded with videos. The sky is breathing, one post said. It's the aurora, but it's everywhere, said another. In truth, no one understood what was happening. Lena did. At least part of her did. She sat at her desk, surrounded by screens filled with unreadable data. Her eyes were tired, her hands shaking slightly. The same repeating wave she'd been tracking had reached Earth's magnetic field. It was no longer distant. It was here. Her assistant walked in quietly. The government just issued a statement, he said. They're asking everyone to stay calm. Lena nodded faintly. They don't understand it yet, she said softly. This isn't an attack, it's a reaction. Reaction to what? She hesitated. To us. To the signal we sent. It's like a mirror. It's responding exactly as we acted, but only stronger. He didn't know what to say. Neither did she. Outside, a soft wind blew across the desert. The air carried a strange scent, almost metallic. The world wasn't falling apart, not yet, but it felt like it was holding its breath. In the cities, people began noticing more oddities. GPS systems stopped working properly. Clocks ran slightly faster or slower depending on the region. Power lines sparked faintly during the night. Even animals started behaving strangely. Dogs barking at empty skies. Flocks of birds flying in endless circles. Scientists tried to explain it, but the truth was too big to fit in words. And then came the night when the stars disappeared. It happened suddenly without warning. Around the world, telescopes and observatories went dark. The entire upper atmosphere shimmered with a faint gray mist. Not smoke, not cloud, but something different. It blocked starlight completely. The sky looked empty, hollow. People panicked. Lena stared at the sky from her observatory's rooftop. The stars had been her companions all her life. Seeing them vanish felt like losing old friends. The air around her buzzed softly, like a deep hum just out of hearing range. Her assistant came running up the stairs holding a printout. "We've got new readings. The energy field is touching the ionosphere. It's like it's wrapping around the planet." She took the paper and looked at it. It was clear now. The energy wasn't just passing through. It was surrounding Earth, slowly closing in like a soft shell of magnetic light. "It's building a boundary," she whispered. "What do you mean?" She looked up at the empty sky. "It's protecting something, or maybe containing something." That thought chilled her. In the following days, confusion spread everywhere. Planes couldn't navigate, so flights were grounded. The internet slowed to a crawl. Power grids flickered unpredictably. But the most unsettling part was the silence from space. No signals, no satellite data, nothing. Earth had become isolated. The world's leaders held emergency conferences. There were debates on live television. Was it a natural event or something else? People demanded answers. But the scientists were running out of explanations that sounded believable. Lena watched the chaos unfold on the news. Crowds gathered in cities, some praying, some shouting, all looking up at the sky that no longer showed stars. She felt a deep ache in her chest. Not fear exactly, but sadness. Humanity had always looked outward for meaning. Now the universe had looked back and no one knew how to respond. One evening, Lena received a message from a colleague overseas. A short, encrypted file. When she opened it, her breath caught. It was an ancient map, overlaid with new data. The same pattern of the energy field matched carvings found in old stone circles across several continents. It couldn't be coincidence. The energy pattern forming around Earth wasn't new. It had happened before. That night, Lena barely spoke. She sat under the dull sky, her face lit by the soft glow of her monitor. The world was unraveling, not with explosions or destruction, but through quiet disconnection. One system, one belief, one illusion at a time. In some ways, it felt almost purposeful. People began to change. With the internet down and power unreliable, life slowed. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started sharing food and candles. Families gathered at night watching the strange gray sky instead of their phones. There was fear, yes, but also something else. A strange kind of unity. It was as if the whole planet had been forced to pause and remember what it meant to exist together. Still, the unknown grew heavier. Scientists warned that the energy field could eventually interfere with Earth's magnetic poles. Some thought it might cause climate shifts or even geological changes. Others insisted it was temporary, that it would fade as quickly as it had come. But Lena had a different theory. In her quiet notes, she wrote, "The signal is not punishment. It's reflection. Whatever this is, it's showing us what we've become, and testing if we can change." As the weeks passed, the gray veil above the world thickened. Sunlight dimmed slightly, making the days cooler and the nights longer. Cities began rationing power. The modern world, so confident in its control over nature, was slowly being humbled. Lena walked through the empty observatory halls one morning and stopped by a window. The sky looked soft and pale like early dawn, but it was already noon. She could see her reflection faintly on the glass. For a moment it felt like she was staring at two versions of herself, one who had sent the signal, and one who now lived with its echo. Her assistant approached quietly. "You think it's going to get worse?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said softly, "I think it's going to change everything." And she was right. In the following days, the Earth's magnetic field began to fluctuate wildly. Compasses no longer pointed north. Migrating animals lost their way. Strange lights danced in the sky even at noon. It was beautiful in a haunting sort of way, but beneath that beauty was a message, one that no one could fully translate. The universe had heard humanity's voice and replied, not in words but in reflection. The energy around Earth wasn't destroying the planet. It was reshaping it, recalibrating it like a system correcting its imbalance. Lena felt torn between wonder and guilt. She had wanted to make contact to prove that humanity was ready for the unknown, but now she wasn't sure. Maybe the unknown had decided humanity wasn't ready yet. That night, as she stood outside the observatory, the soft wind brushed her hair and carried a faint hum. So low, so gentle, it almost felt like breathing. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she imagined the Earth not as a planet under threat, but as a living being spoken to, reminded of its place in something much bigger. And deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. The universe hadn't turned against humanity. It was simply asking one question in its own strange way. Are you ready to listen? Lena didn't have an answer yet, but she knew one thing. The real test was still to come. Weeks had passed since the gray veil covered the skies. The world had fallen quiet. Cities still stood, but they no longer buzzed with the same energy. The endless rush of machines, traffic, and voices had faded into something slower, softer. People were learning to live without constant power. Some areas had no electricity at all for days, but strangely the world didn't stop. People adapted. They lit fires, shared food, and watched the dim skies together. For the first time in generations, human beings were looking at the same sky and feeling the same uncertainty. But not everyone saw the stillness as peace. Many believed it was the beginning of something much larger, something waiting to happen. Lena spent most of her days at the observatory, surrounded by silent equipment. The machines couldn't communicate with satellites anymore, but she had found other ways to listen. Old analog devices, magnetic compasses, even basic radio antennas. They all picked up faint patterns in the background noise. It wasn't random static. It was rhythmic, slow, deliberate, almost like breathing. Sometimes she would close her eyes and just listen to it. There was something strangely calm about it, something that made her feel both small and connected at the same time. Her assistant would often find her lost in those sounds. "You hear something again?" he'd ask. She'd nod slightly. "It's still talking to us," she'd whisper, "just in a different way now." The governments had stopped making public statements. They were as confused as everyone else. Some scientists believed the magnetic veil would fade away naturally, while others feared it might change Earth forever. Then one day, something unexpected happened. The sky began to shimmer. Not just in one place, but everywhere. A faint wave of silver light that rippled across the horizon like sunlight on water. It lasted for several minutes, then faded. Lena recorded everything. The readings showed that the energy field around Earth was shifting again. But this time it wasn't compressing. It was expanding. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her small office, staring at the pale, starless sky. She thought about the old world, the busy cities, the screens, the endless noise, and how quickly it had all gone quiet. Maybe, she thought, the silence wasn't punishment. Maybe it was an invitation to listen. The next morning she gathered what was left of her team and shared her idea. "What if this energy isn't here to destroy us?" she said. "What if it's here to reset something?" They looked at her uncertainly. "You mean like starting over?" "Yes, maybe the universe has ways of correcting imbalance, and we triggered one. If that's true, maybe we can speak back to it, not with machines this time, but with something simpler, something it understands." No one knew what she meant at first, but Lena had been studying old civilizations, ancient writings, and strange carvings found across the world. They all described similar events. Skies darkened, stars vanished, the earth trembled, and then humanity changed. Those ancient people had survived without technology. They had built stone monuments aligned with stars. Maybe they knew something modern humans had forgotten. Lena began to develop a new idea, Project Reversal. It wasn't about fighting the energy field or stopping it. It was about responding to it, sending a message back not through technology, but through understanding. She and her small team built a device using the simplest materials possible: copper coils. Old transmitters and a magnetic generator that didn't rely on digital systems. They placed it in the center of the observatory, aligned perfectly with Earth's magnetic north. The idea was to send a low-frequency signal, a soft pulse that would mirror the rhythm of the Earth itself, a kind of apology, or maybe just a reminder that humans were still here and willing to learn. For days, they worked in silence. Outside, the world seemed suspended between fear and hope. Some people believed the energy wave was divine. Others called it science. But everyone could feel that something was about to change. Finally, the night came. The air was cool and still. The sky above the desert shimmered faintly in the color of soft steel. Lena stood by the machine, her hand hovering over the activation switch. "This isn't a command," she said quietly. "It's just a message, a sign that we understand." Her assistant nodded. "And if it doesn't work?" She smiled faintly. "Then at least we tried to speak with respect." She pressed the button. The device began to hum. A gentle vibration filled the room, deep and slow. The signal pulsed outward, a calm wave moving into the magnetic field surrounding the planet. At first, nothing happened. The instrument stayed still. The sky didn't change. But then, gradually, the readings began to shift. The field's frequency started to align with the pulse they were sending. Not perfectly, but enough to show response. Lena's heart raced. "It's listening," she whispered. The hum grew softer, smoother, until it matched the natural rhythm of the Earth's own magnetic beat. For a moment, everything felt balanced. The machines, the air, even the ground beneath their feet. And then, it stopped. Total silence. Lena waited, afraid to breathe. Her assistant checked the instruments. "The signal's gone," he said softly. She closed her eyes. "No," she whispered. "It's not gone. It's been received." That night, as she stepped outside, the air felt lighter. The gray veil above seemed thinner, as if the sky itself was slowly waking up. The next morning, something remarkable happened all around the world. The faint hum that had been present for weeks faded completely. The compasses began working again. Radio frequencies cleared. The strange shimmering in the skies began to dissolve. And then, for the first time in months, the stars reappeared. People flooded the streets, looking up and cheering, some crying. In cities, villages, and remote towns, everyone shared the same moment, a collective breath of relief. It was as if the planet had finally exhaled. Lena stood outside her observatory, staring up at the stars. They looked brighter than before, cleaner, as though the sky itself had been washed. Her assistant walked up beside her. "You think we did it?" he asked quietly. She nodded slowly. "No," she said. "I think we understood it." Over the next few days, the world began to rebuild. Power grids came back online, though not all at once. Communication networks flickered with life. But something had changed in people. They no longer spoke about going back to normal. They talked about starting new, living differently, more carefully, more aware. Governments formed new agreements focused on cooperation. Old rivalries faded. For once, humanity shared a sense of humility, the understanding that their world was fragile, and that they were part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. Lena spent her days studying the data from the final signal. It was faint, but she found something hidden inside it. A repeating pulse that seemed to mirror Earth's natural frequency. It wasn't from her device. It was coming from space. It was as if the source, whatever had sent the original signal, had replied one last time, acknowledging the response. She smiled quietly. "So you heard us after all," she whispered. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of understanding. Weeks later, as the observatory began to close down, now more of a museum than a laboratory, Lena left a small note in her desk drawer. It wasn't a scientific record, just a simple message written in her neat handwriting. The universe doesn't punish. It reflects. It speaks in echoes, and when we finally stop shouting, we can hear what it's been trying to say all along. When she stepped outside for the last time, the wind was calm and the stars stretched endlessly across the night sky. Somewhere deep within that vast space, a faint pulse still shimmered. Not a warning, not a threat, but a quiet reminder. A reminder that life, all life, was connected by invisible threads of energy and understanding. And maybe, just maybe, Humanity had finally taken its first step toward listening. The world was calm again, but it was not the same world anymore. The stars had returned brighter and clearer than ever before. The nights were quieter, as if the earth itself was resting after a long storm. But even though the danger had passed, people couldn't forget what had happened. Something inside humanity had shifted. Lena watched the sunrise from the observatory hill. The light spread slowly across the land, soft and golden. It looked like the planet was waking up from a long, strange dream. Months had passed since the energy field dissolved. Machines worked again, satellites came back online, and the networks of the world buzzed once more. But people had changed. They no longer rushed as before. The noise of life had softened. In every city you could see small changes. Gardens growing on rooftops, people walking instead of driving, quiet gatherings under the open sky. There was still struggle and uncertainty, but there was also patience. For the first time, humans seemed to understand that they weren't alone in the vastness of the universe, and that their actions carried weight far beyond what they could see. For Lena, the days were quieter now. Her work at the observatory had ended, but her curiosity hadn't. She still spent her evenings watching the stars, not for discovery, but for connection. The signal that once brought fear now felt like a distant teacher, a reminder that knowledge without wisdom could be dangerous. One afternoon, as she sorted through old data, she noticed something strange. The magnetic readings from the weeks after the veil lifted weren't completely still. There was a small repeating pattern, faint, almost hidden between noise. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. She leaned closer to the screen. "No," she whispered to herself, "it can't be." The pattern wasn't random. It matched the rhythm of the signal her team had sent during Project Reversal. Only this one was slower, steadier, as if the universe had taken their message and was now sending a quiet reply. Lena printed the readings and studied them for hours. The pattern repeated every 24 hours, perfectly in sync with Earth's rotation. It was like a constant reminder, I'm still here. I'm still listening. That night she climbed to the top of the hill near the observatory. The air was crisp and the stars looked sharper than she had ever seen. She closed her eyes and listened. There was no sound, but she could feel something. A stillness that felt alive. Maybe she thought this was the real purpose of it all. Not destruction, not punishment, but awakening. Humanity had been so busy shouting into the void that they forgot how to listen. Now finally they were learning. Across the world, people were finding new meanings too. The old systems that once divided nations had begun to crumble. Governments started sharing research openly. Scientists worked together, not for competition but for understanding. The energy that had once terrified the planet had left behind something valuable, humility. And yet there were still those who couldn't let go of fear. Some people believed the energy would return. Others called it a test that humanity had barely passed. There were endless theories, but no proof. Lena didn't argue. She believed that fear was part of growth. It was the shadow that made light visible. One evening, she was invited to speak at a global conference, the first large gathering since the event. She wasn't sure she wanted to go. She was tired of screens, tired of big speeches and empty words. But something inside told her it was time to share what she had learned. When she stood on the stage, the lights felt too bright. The audience waited, silent and curious. She took a deep breath and began softly. A few years ago, we sent a message into the unknown. We wanted to make contact to prove that we were not alone. And we got our answer. Not through words, but through reflection. She paused, letting the room settle into silence. What came wasn't an attack. It wasn't punishment. It was a mirror. The universe showed us what we had become, disconnected, restless, and proud. But it also gave us a chance to see our potential. We survived not because of our machines, but because we remembered how to listen. We remembered how to be human. People listened closely, some nodding, some wiping quiet tears. Lena looked out at them and smiled softly. The signal changed our world, yes. But the real change didn't happen in the sky. It happened here, she said, placing her hand over her heart. In us. When she finished, there was no loud applause at first, just stillness. Then slowly the entire hall stood up in quiet respect. It wasn't celebration. It was gratitude. After the conference, as she walked outside, the night air felt peaceful. She looked up at the sky again, endless, mysterious, and full of life. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a faint shimmer like a single thread of silver light stretching across the stars. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe it was a sign, a silent acknowledgement that the universe had heard her too. The following years brought new beginnings. Technology became cleaner, simpler, and more respectful of nature. Energy came from sources that worked with the planet instead of against it. Education shifted. Children were taught not just science, but balance, empathy, and wonder. Lena often visited small towns and schools to talk to young people. She never spoke about fear or warnings. She spoke about curiosity, about how asking questions could be beautiful if done with care. She would tell them, "The universe isn't against us. It's like a river. If we move with it, we flow easily. If we fight it, we drown. The choice is always ours." The children loved her stories. They would ask, "Will the sky change again?" And she would smile and say, "It already has inside us." Years passed quietly. The world didn't return to the old ways. Humanity didn't forget the lesson. It became part of their shared memory, something parents told their children, and teachers shared in classrooms. Some scientists continued to track the faint pulse that circled Earth, believing it was proof that something beyond still watched over them. Others dismissed it as a natural magnetic rhythm, but Lena never argued. She had learned that truth didn't always need proof. Sometimes it lived quietly inside belief. One night, much later in her life, she sat by the window with a notebook in her lap. The stars glowed softly outside. She wrote her final note, not for science, but for humanity. If one day someone out there calls again, may we answer with humility, not pride. May we listen before we speak. May we remember that every sound we send into the universe comes back, not as punishment, but as understanding. She put the notebook down, took a deep breath, and looked up at the stars. For the first time in many years, she felt complete. Somewhere in the quiet fabric of space, a soft pulse shimmered. Steady, calm, eternal. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. But if you were still enough, you could almost feel it, like the slow heartbeat of the universe itself. The world had awakened, not through force, but through realization. The reckoning had never been about destruction. It had been about awareness, and so, humanity moved forward, gentler, wiser, and finally aware of the quiet truth that had always been waiting for them, that everything they reached for in the stars had always begun inside themselves.